complexity and rigorous character of the enlargement process is not likely to go away, nor is it likely to happen quickly. So we're looking at the process that will take some time. And so what do we do in the meantime? And one of the things that my organization has been argued recently quite forcefully is that perhaps we need to shift a bit attention away from the technicality and conditionality and enlargement process as such, while this is going on. So we're not arguing against stopping enlargement. We're just suggesting that perhaps to complement this process, we need to start thinking of how else we can strengthen and diversify the ways in which the member states and the EU can relate to the Balkan countries on the basis of the interests and problems that the two sides share. For example, I mean, we've briefly heard some of the issues that could make the focus of this strengthened cooperation. If it comes to environment and climate, if it comes to security, if it comes to migration, if it comes to immigration, if it comes to digital, if it comes to economy, if it comes to democracy, there are so many points on which both sides have something at stake, and where there is a need to strengthen cooperation. And by involving the Balkan countries in the brainstorming or in the formulation of the policies or positions that the EU is expected to take on all of these critical priority areas with the new leadership being in power, by involving the Balkans in all this, I think it would send also a positive signal that the EU is serious about the region, is seeing the region as future members, and is seeing the region as partners. And of course, this can happen by various ways, through at different levels and at different meetings that take place in the EU. I know that I'm running long, so I won't go into detail, but it could very concretely happen now within the framework of the conference that the new Commission President has proposed, the conference on the future of Europe, and the agenda that will be put forward, I think, should make sure that there is scope for representatives from the region at the political but also civil society level can contribute. I will stop here. I know we're running a bit out of time. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was very to the point, actually. There's been some talk, and strangely enough, there's now all of a sudden a little bit of a lull, that in a way the EU, because its rules and regulations in that regard are not really carved into stone. It all depends upon the candidate country and everything. That there should be some sort of, and I'm going on a very thin limb, sort of a conditional membership or advantages for candidate countries to be included into certain processes in the chapters they have closed. It's a way of drawing them nearer and closer, making them part of the system, but I see that is not happening yet. I'm going to ask you a question now. Obviously, a lot hinges in the West Balkans on the talks between Belgrade and Pristina. How do you read yesterday's results of the elections? Whoever wants to start first.
Well, I thought you were, I always like a provocation, but I thought you were asking to feedback on what the professor said, the many good points he made. But on the election, certainly it's early to say. I mean, certainly as the EU will come up tomorrow with our readout of election. We have an electoral mission. We had an electoral mission in Pristina in place to oversee and observe the election. So on the election as such, we will make comments tomorrow, and certainly for what will be the result, end of result in Kosovo, I think it's early to say. I think the political forces there have to talk among themselves and find what will be the result and how to get the majority. Can I get back on some of the points the professor made? Okay, no, thank you. Somebody has to make a little bit of provocation, but you don't expect the provocation came from us. So basically, Europe has challenges. Of course, who doesn't have challenges? I think it would be very strange not believe that the challenge do not exist. But the question is what kind of responses the EU is giving to challenges. And if you look also in the last 5 years, all the back paddlers, Greece was in trouble. There was a sort of catastrophe on the Eurozone. Didn't happen. The UK made a referendum. There was foreseen that everybody would go through a number of referendums. Didn't happen. We had the migration collapse on Schengen. Didn't happen. So I don't want to see as too much self-confident, but I think what can be said of the EU, we are an extremely resilient bunch of people with our own procedure and our own ideas. And certainly if you look at where we are now, we are certainly in a much better position where we were before. But of course, challenges are there, but certainly there's no sense of complacency. Populism and nationalism, who doesn't have it? Raise the hand, certainly we have. But if you look again at the European Parliament election, the forces, there was a lot of prediction. The forces, so the EPP, Social Democrat, Liberal, Green, the pro-EU forces are there, and they have command a large majority. Again, the challenge is there, the response is the correct one. Second point, accession. It's true that, the Germany is strong forces. We lost, certainly UK, who has been a traditional friend of enlargement, will probably push for the enlargement from outside when we'll be there, but certainly I wouldn't say that I will not reduce certainly enlargement to two countries. Don't forget, it's a policy based on unanimity, and there's a lot of countries who are in favor of enlargement on this part of the fence, in the room. Question of sovereign Europe. If you read, as you probably read, the global strategy in 2016, there were a number of elements about what the European is about. I think it's a natural evolution that a global trader, a global donor, a global investor, a leader in climate has to become, or is already, need to become a global leader also on foreign and security policy. And I think the work that the Commission and the IREP made in the past 3 years on defense, I think it should be under the eyes of everything. The sequence about reform versus internal reform, external reform, I think also the visit of President Macron clarified the points here in July. We are talking about, not sequencing, about parallelism. You can do accession when you do internal reform. One doesn't exclude the other one. 4th point, quickly, geopolitical environment. I agree with you. This is I don't know if it's new or not, but certainly is an element that everybody is taking in consideration in approaching the accession. I shouldn't be the only one. Not because there's some others, third player interested in the region that we need to do accession. So the accession will come in any case, but certainly is an element. The element, the quotation, exporting stability versus importing stability is correct. Again, the reply is to reform. We export stability if the countries in the region do reform. In that sense, we will not import instability. Decoupling is not happening, but it's always a risk there. And the last point, of course, the Western Balkan strategy last year passed a number of messages on having already a sectorial element with some of the six, where to increase the cooperation. I think that at the end of the day, this has been called the six flagship initiative. So there's some area where there's been an agreement that we need to do more and to do together on migration, and is not maybe the optimal, but certainly what we have now. But certainly this is the current framework of the Commission, and the enlargement policy is the one, and we have to work with it, but certainly ideas for the future are certainly interesting and welcome.
I just wanted to react a little bit to this reform, to this call for reform, because as much as I agree that we need to be strict and conditions need to be met, I think we also need to recognize that some of the models and some of the conditions that we're putting forward for these countries. I mean, we don't really know if it works. And in some areas, it doesn't seem to be working. So the kind of issues that the region, that we're confronted with in the regions, we don't really know how to resolve. And that goes from democratic dilemmas to economic problems to bilateral issues to historic legacies and reconciliation topics. And so we talk of reform as if we had really the magic recipe and these countries were just not following it, which I don't think it's really the case. I think there are also points in which we need to the two sides need to figure out together how we, or the EU needs to figure out how actually, what actually we can ask of these countries in order to help them get over some of the obstacles that they face. So far, we've kind of circumvented some of the thornier areas of more problematic areas by, prioritizing, say, security or stability, security and stability over democracy, and we're seeing how now is coming back with a vengeance some of these issues because we let them, we close the eye for too long to some of these aspects, and sooner or later we're going to have to face them. Yet we don't really know how to fix them. I mean, the Commission has been very brave in the past, in the latest two strategies by calling out state capture and media problems with the freedom of the media. But how do we solve these issues? How do we deal with state capture in the region? How do we ensure a free and a free media environment? How do we support the liberty of civil society? We don't really know how to do it. And interestingly or ironically, even in some of the member states, we have similar problems. So then, how do we do that? Yes, reforms and being strict, but also being a little bit humble to recognize that in some aspects and in some areas, we don't really know how to do to get the job done. I think we need also a little bit of humility, if you want.
That's the flexibility I was talking about. Professor, I have a quick question for you, or the distinguished panelists. This is not exactly completely a new idea, but on several occasions it's been mentioned. And actually, there were, at some point, some circles in Brussels that even urged the idea. CEFTA++, a new reorganization in the Western Balkans, in free trade. What do you think about that?
I think it's a very good idea. Just avoid calling it mini Schengen, because this has been a term that does not instigate very positive reflexes. This is what happened after 2015. The Benelux plus Germany plus Austria moved to a mini Schengen, and the rest were not very happy with it. But a CEFTA++ is an excellent idea. I mean, the European Union has emerged as the result of formations of regional integration, Benelux, the Nordics, etc. That's where you begin practicing regional integration before you are able to move on to European integration. So it would give great momentum to the region. It would allow mobility, which is an inherent element. It's one of the fundamental freedoms of the European Union, mobility within the region. It will rid us from the queues and on the borders. It will allow to revisit the notion of borders, which have been sources of ethnic and nationalistic conflict in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans in particular. And all these are very positive elements. And it would also allow the kind of intelligence and information sharing, because sustaining open borders is not something that rids you from the obligation to enforce security and cooperation of home authorities and so forth, which is an element that provides a kind of a practicing ground for ensuring external borders that are guarded effectively. So I think it would be a fine idea, and it would be a kind of a process that would further facilitate the effort to render the Western Balkan countries members of the European Union. May I say that I represent an organization, ELIAMEP, which is an independent think tank in Greece for the last 30+ years, which has openly and consistently supported enlargement, and especially enlargement towards the Balkans, and therefore I feel quite committed to the idea, which also forces upon us the obligation to think about it in a very cool-headed manner, in order to discern where the obstacles are and how thus to be able to devise better strategies to bring it about.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen.
Maybe just if I may add, from our point of view, of course, regional cooperation is absolutely one of the biggest and most important goals. So it's a precondition, actually. We do not see that the best way to how to succeed than to work together. So mutual cooperation in the region is absolutely very important, but it should not be a substitute for the membership. I think it's quite important to distinguish in a way those two issues. Yes, regional cooperation, absolutely sine qua non for the deepening of the cooperation in the region in many areas, digital, connectivity, joint cooperation when it comes to law enforcement, etc. So, but on the other side, this kind of torch of the European Union needs to prevail. So the final goal, this is our experience. So you got to have a kind of a final vision that the membership is, of course, approachable. So it is quite important to, in a way, to distinguish those two issues, to have cooperation. This is the goal, but we should definitely stick with our obligations in a way, and this would be our approach during the presidency. So mutual cooperation, absolutely, extremely important, but on the other side, the EU perspective needs to remain like a very important, attractive goal for the countries in the Western Balkans.
Thank you. Without any doubt, you will.
I wanted to add half a sentence to what's been said. I think regional cooperation is critically important, but I would also like to encourage cooperation, stronger cooperations with individual member states, because I think part of dismissing a myth about the region and helping EU capitals better understand the position and the situation in those countries, it is important on a diplomatic level, but also on a people-to-people level for ties to be stronger. And I think this is an effort that should come not only from the EU capitals, but also from the countries of the region, which should be which should try to identify which are the member states that need more persuasion, or which are their best friends and their worst enemies, if you want, inside the union, and then reach out to those and massage those relationships. Because at the end of the day, no matter what the Commission does or says, the decision over enlargement, I mean, the dossier remains intergovernmental in nature, so it is up to the member states to decide. And I think that's also another dimension that should be borne in mind.
Oh, thank you. Well, obviously, West Balkans is a patchwork of problems and aspirations and various dynamics. But I do have to note